They wore racing stripes, spoilers, and bold Cobra badges, but under the hood, disappointment. These 1970 Mustangs looked like they could dominate a track but struggled to outrun a Pinto. Buckle up as we unmask the 8 most misleading muscle imposters Ford ever built. The 1970s were a time of confusion, gas crises, emissions laws, and shrinking horsepower. Yet Ford dressed its Mustangs like race cars, hoping nobody would notice what they left out: speed. Behind the bold designs and flashy decals were engines barely fit for freeway merges. In this countdown, we expose the 8 Mustangs that promised muscle and delivered mediocrity. Top 1, 1974-78 Mustang II Cobra II. It looked like it could tear up the streets, like a reincarnation of the original Shelby Cobra. But the 1974-78 Mustang II Cobra II was all bark and no bite, a flashy costume hiding commuter car bones. Ford introduced the Cobra II package in 1976 as an attempt to recapture the spirit of the 1960s muscle car era. It was the bicentennial, and patriotism was in the air. What better time to slap red, white, and blue racing stripes on a Mustang? The Cobra II wore aggressive graphics, a front air dam, rear spoiler, hood scoop, non-functional, quarter-window louvers, and optional chrome wheels. It mimicked the visual attitude of the Boss 302 and GT300. The interior got sport bucket seats, a 3-spoke steering wheel, and Cobra badging. It looked the part. From a distance, it could fool you into thinking it was ready for a track day. But under all that flair was the reality. The Cobra II was built on the Pinto platform. The base engine was a 2.3 L 4-cylinder, making just 88 horsepower. The top option, a 302 cubic inch 5L V8, was choked by emissions gear and delivered a mere 139 horsepower. That V8 was paired with a 3-speed automatic or a 4-speed manual, but even with a manual and ideal conditions, 0 to 60 miles per hour came in around 10.5 seconds. A Pinto could do the same sprint in under 11. The Cobra II had the look of a predator, but the lungs of a hamster. Despite the performance letdown, the Cobra II actually sold well. Ford capitalized on nostalgia, selling over 125,000 units of Cobra IIs between 1976 and 1978. Its appeal wasn't in numbers, it was in style. It gave average buyers a slice of muscle car swagger during an era when horsepower was under siege by regulations. But true enthusiasts knew it wasn't the second coming of the Cobra. It was a decal package on a glorified economy car. Still, if the Cobra II was a case of style over substance, the next Mustang doubled down, reviving the Mach 1 name on the same underpowered platform, and somehow it got even slower. Top 2, 1974-78 Mustang II Mach 1. It wore the Mach 1 badge with pride, evoking memories of quarter-mile domination, shaker hoods, and snarling V8s. But by the time it reached the mid-1970s, the Mustang II Mach 1 was no longer a rocket, it was a rerun. After the fuel crisis and mounting emissions regulations, Ford downsized the Mustang in 1974. The new Mustang II was smaller, lighter, and based on the humble Pinto platform. Still, Ford wasn't ready to let go of performance branding. Enter the Mach 1 edition, complete with striping kits, styled wheels, blackout grills, and badging that whispered of past glory. You could even order sport mirrors and Raleigh suspension. Inside, it offered vinyl high-back buckets, optional console gauges, and an AM/FM stereo luxuries for the time, but the soul of a muscle car, nowhere to be found. Buyers expecting a tire-shredding beast were in for a rude awakening. The standard engine was a 2.8 LV6, making a meager 97 horsepower. If you were lucky, you could spec the 302 V8 5L, which eked out only 139 horsepower. That might have been acceptable in a sedan, but in a car wearing the Mach 1 badge? Blasphemy. Even with the V8, 0 to 60 miles per hour took over 10 seconds. And remember, the Mustang II was heavier than it looked due to added safety gear, robbing even more performance. There were no Ram air scoops, no limited slip rears, no 4-barrel Hollies, just emissions controls and low-octane disappointment. Despite the mismatch between image and performance, the Mustang II Mach 1 sold well. In 1974 alone, Ford sold over 44,000 Mach 1 units, buyers drawn to the badge, not the specs. For many, it was their first Mustang, a safe, stylish coupe during an era when speed was politically incorrect. But in the muscle car world, it became a punchline. It wore a racing name but couldn't win a race against a stock Vega. Still, if the Mach 1 tried to honor the past, the next Mustang didn't even bother. It ballooned in size, shed all performance intentions, and looked more like a bloated barge than a corner carver, yet Ford called it a SportsRoof. Top 3 1971-73. Mustang SportsRoof, big body. It was wide. It was low. It had a fastback silhouette that screamed high speed. But the 1971-73 Mustang SportsRoof was more boulevard cruiser than track weapon, and despite the shape, it couldn't outrun its own bulk. By 1971, the Mustang had outgrown its original pony car roots. Ford stretched the wheelbase, widened the track, and bulked up the sheet metal to accommodate the big block 429 engines and meet new federal crash regulations. The SportsRoof model retained the fastback profile but with a longer rear deck and exaggerated overhangs. It looked like a Trans Am bruiser, especially when ordered with Magnum 500 wheels, dual racing mirrors, a front chin spoiler, and optional blackout hood treatment. Inside, you got high-back bucket seats, simulated wood grain trim, and for a price, a full rally gauge cluster. On paper, it had presence. In the real world, it had problems. The base 1971-73 SportsRoof came standard with a 260 Ci inline-6 making just 98 horsepower. Even the 302 V8 was rated at only 140 horsepower in 1972-73 models. The big 351 and 429 V8s were optional, but those were rare, and by 1973, the 429 was gone entirely. What remained were heavy, underpowered cars struggling with emissions gear, low compression, and sluggish 0 to 60 miles per hour times in the 10-12 second range. The car's sheer weight, over 3,400 pounds, meant that even upgraded versions weren't nimble. It looked ready to rumble, but a base SportsRoof was often outrun by family sedans. Sales were respectable, with nearly 180,000 SportsRoof Mustangs sold between 1971 and 1973. But as muscle car performance faded and insurance premiums climbed, buyers wanted image more than speed. Ford gave them exactly that. The SportsRoof became a symbol of the muscle car era's bloated finale, a car that promised action but delivered cruise night vibes instead. By 1973, the Mustang had lost its bite and most of its performance variants. But if the big-body SportsRoof looked the part but couldn't deliver, what happens when Ford drops the convertible top, slaps on a 351 HO badge, and tries to convince America it's a performance comeback? The result was embarrassing. Huff 4, 1973 Mustang Convertible 351 HO Sprint. It wore a badge that whispered high output. It had dual racing mirrors, bright striping, and a drop-top profile that turned heads. But the 1973 Mustang Convertible 351 HO Sprint was more high optimism than high performance. By 1973, Ford was scrambling to inject life into the fading Mustang line. The Sprint Decor package was a cosmetic bundle offered on coupes, fastbacks, and convertibles. It featured color-keyed sport mirrors, bold exterior stripes, and often came in patriotic red-white-blue combinations. The convertible version, especially when paired with the optional 351 HO engine, seemed like a last gasp of true Mustang muscle. Buyers got a power-folding top, slotted mag wheels, and bright chrome accents. Inside, the car featured vinyl bucket seats, a deluxe steering wheel, and, if you splurged, a center console with faux wood grain. It looked sporty, it looked promising, but it was more of a sunset than a sunrise. The 351 HO was a shell of its former self. Unlike the 1971 Boss-powered HO version, this 1973 variant was a low-compression 361 Cleveland with open chamber heads and a two-barrel carb, making a mere 177 horsepower. Paired with a heavy convertible body and a 3-speed automatic, the 0 to 60 miles per hour time hovered around 11 seconds. That was slower than a Pinto. The car handled like a couch, thanks to vague steering and soft suspension tuned for comfort, not cornering. The convertible's added weight and reduced chassis rigidity made things worse. Despite the badge and visuals, this was a cruiser, not a contender. Only 11,853 Mustang convertibles were produced in 1973, and just a fraction came with the Sprint package and optional 351 HO engine. It was a rare combination, but rarity doesn't equal greatness. This was a case of image over substance, a final flex of styling cues before the Mustang shrank into its controversial Mustang II phase. Collectors today might chase these for nostalgia, but performance junkies steer clear. Yet somehow, as Ford shifted toward its next chapter, it found new ways to dress up slow cars with fast looks. And what better name to recycle than Mach 1? The badge returned, but the firepower didn't. Top 5. 1970 Mach 1 Base 351W. The Mach 1 name still carried weight: shaker hoods, racing stripes, rear window louvers. But in its base 1970 form, with a 351 W2 barrel under the hood, this Mach was all show and no go. By 1970, the Mustang Mach 1 had become Ford's flagship for street performance. With its aggressive styling, dual-sport mirrors, honeycomb grille, chin spoiler, hood pins, and blacked-out hood treatment, it looked ready to dominate. Inside, the Mach 1 came standard with high-back bucket seats, wood-grain dash trim, and a rim-blow steering wheel. It shouted performance before you even turned the key. But beneath that muscle-bound packaging, not all Mach 1s were created equal. The base engine for the 1970 Mach 1? A 351 cubic inch Windsor V8 with a 2-bar carburetor making just 250 horsepower. While respectable on paper, this engine lacked the high revving spirit of the 351 Cleveland or the brutal torque of the 428 Cobra Jet. It came with a 3-speed manual as standard, with optional automatic. No 4-barrel, no ram air, no limited slip rear, just a mild-mannered cruiser in a muscle car suit. Weighing over 3,200 pounds, the base Mach 1 struggled to break 0 to 60 miles per hour in under 9.5 seconds. Hardly the stuff of legends. And worse? Ford never badged the engine size externally, so unless you popped the hood, you'd never know you were being outrun by a GTO in reverse. Despite its lukewarm performance, the 1970 Mach 1 sold extremely well. Over 40,970 units were produced that year. Most buyers were drawn in by the styling and didn't care about quarter-mile times. The insurance crisis and rising fuel costs meant that base engine Mach 1s made up the bulk of sales. For collectors today, it's one of the most commonly seen Mach 1s at shows, but also one of the least celebrated. It's the Mustang that pretended to be meaner than it was. But if the 351W-powered Mach 1 was a mild sheep in wolf's clothing, what happens when Ford goes full retro drag racer with stripes, spoilers, and fake side exhausts on an even slower Mustang? The Cobra name returns, and so does the disappointment. Top 6. 1978 Mustang II Cobra. By 1978, the Mustang II Cobra looked like it had been lifted straight from a Hot Wheels package. Wild graphics, flares, spoilers, but under all that plastic and paint was a car that could barely outrun your mom's station wagon. The Mustang II Cobra for 1978 was Ford's attempt to breathe new life into a nameplate that had lost its performance soul. With a blacked-out grille, front air dam, flared fenders, optional T-tops, and bold Cobra lettering along the flanks, it was a visual knockout for the era. Buyers could choose from vibrant paint schemes, and many opted for the wild Cobra snake hood decal that practically shouted, "I'm fast!" The interior got a sporty treatment too: high-back bucket seats, a 3-spoke sport wheel, and simulated engine-turned dash trim. It looked the part. But that was where the excitement stopped. The hottest engine option in the '78 Cobra was the 302 CI 5L V8, pushing out a disappointing 139 horsepower, and that's being generous. Choked by emissions controls, this once proud small block was no longer a fire breather. Most Cobras came with a 3-speed automatic or an optional 4-speed manual. Even with the manual, the 0 to 60 miles per hour sprint dragged on for over 10 seconds. And thanks to its Pinto roots, the Mustang II suffered from awkward handling, body flex, and nose-heavy balance. The Cobra name had returned, but the venom was long gone. Despite the lackluster performance, the Mustang II Cobra found a market especially among younger buyers who valued style and affordability over raw speed. Ford sold approximately 25,000 Cobra IIs in 1978 alone. It was a car sold on attitude, not acceleration. Today they're remembered more as symbols of the malaise era than street legends. The Cobra badge, once sacred, thanks to Carroll Shelby, had been reduced to a sticker package. Still, if you thought the Cobra was the low point of Mustang muscle, wait until you see what Ford did with the luxury-focused Grande edition. It had padded vinyl, opera windows, and the soul of a taxicab. Performance? That was someone else's problem. Top 7. 1978 Ford Mustang II King Cobra in orange. It looked like something straight out of a NASCAR fever dream: screaming orange paint, massive snake decals slithering across the hood, a deep chin spoiler, and fender flares wide enough to make a Trans Am blush. The 1978 Mustang II Cobra didn't just show up. It announced itself like it was ready to eat quarter miles for breakfast. Ford unveiled the King Cobra as the ultimate swan song for the Mustang II era. With only 4,313 units produced, it was rarer than most people realize, and it came fully loaded with aggressive styling cues, a blackout grille with integrated fog lamps, racing-style front air dam, and bold King Cobra lettering that wrapped around the body like a billboard. Inside, you got a driver-focused cockpit for the era, high-back bucket seats in vinyl or optional cloth, faux wood-grain dash inserts, rally-style gauges, and a tilt steering wheel. Every inch of it whispered, "Track monster." And yet, beneath that Cobra's hood slithered a rather tame 302 cubic inch 5-lights V8, rated at just 139 horsepower, thanks to emissions strangulation. Even with its 250 pound-feet of torque, it needed around 10.5 seconds to crawl from 0 to 60 miles per hour slower than a Pinto, with the right gearing. Buyers expecting a street-legal stock car found themselves with a boulevard cruiser wearing a drag strip costume. Still, the King Cobra turned heads everywhere it went. It was as much about presence as performance. For collectors today, its limited run, wild graphics package, and being the final year halo car for the Mustang II make it a standout piece of 1970 automotive culture. In an era where fuel economy and insurance rates dictated design, Ford sold a dream on 4 wheels, even if reality was a little more measured. The orange examples, especially with the full decal kit intact, remain the most photogenic survivors. But not every Mustang II relied on flamboyant stripes and flared fenders to make a statement. Some went the opposite route, trading in race day flash for showroom polish, luxury trim, and a promise of grand touring comfort. And that's where our next car comes in, a Mustang that swapped the venom of a King Cobra for the tailored suit of a Ghia. Top 8, 1976 Mustang II GT Ghia walkthrough. What do you get when you combine a GT performance badge with Ghia luxury styling? In 1976, you got the Mustang II GT, a confused identity on 4 wheels that talked fast and drove slow. Ford was desperate to keep the Mustang name relevant during the performance drought of the 1970s. The solution? Add letters. The GT badge had once belonged to fastbacks tearing up drag strips. By 1976, it was pasted on a Mustang II with optional Ghia luxury trim, soft seats, and opera windows. Outside, the Mustang II GT wore body-colored bumpers, styled steel wheels, blacked-out grille, and optional racing stripes. Some models even came with T-top roofs. Inside, it offered a plush walkthrough of 70s kitsch, wood-grain accents, velour bucket seats, and a center console. Ghia versions added luxury touches like extra insulation and stitched vinyl, but it all served as a distraction from the fact that this was still a Pinto underneath. The Mustang II GT's most potent engine option was the 302 CI 5L V8, rated at a mere 139 horsepower. The standard transmission was a 4-speed manual, but most came with a lazy 3-speed automatic. Performance: a 0 to 60 miles per hour time hovering around 10.5 seconds. The car was heavy, softly sprung, and reluctant to corner with confidence. Despite the GT designation, there were no meaningful upgrades to the suspension or brakes. In short, it wore the badge but skipped the workout. Roughly 13,000 Mustang II GTs were sold in 1976. That number might seem small, but it reflects the public's confusion. Muscle car fans saw through the badge. Luxury seekers preferred the Ghia without the fake performance. It was a car marketed to everyone and loved by no one. Today, the Mustang II GT lives on mostly in satire, remembered as the embodiment of the Malaise era's hollow promises. And just like that, our list ends with a soft thud, an era where speed bowed to style and performance became marketing. But the 1970 Mustangs we've covered here, they proved something deeper. Even when they were slow, they looked fast enough to fool us. And maybe, in a decade of compromise, that was the point. They looked like legends but drove like commuters. These 8 Mustangs taught us that a fast look doesn't mean fast laps. While some collectors now cherish them for nostalgia, performance purists still cringe. The 1970 Mustang was all bark, no bite. But that makes their story all the more unforgettable. Which one fooled you the most?